So out of this geometry, this whole geometry, what we're interested in to consider as an emitter source or surface is going to be the area of the tire, the rubber part of the tire that's actually in contact with the ground. Okay, so that's the first thing that we want to select. And the other thing is we're not going to be doing these operations on an animated geometry. So actually the first step is going to be to kind of freeze the geometry on the first frame, and then we'll process it, and then we'll transfer the animation back. So the first thing is going to be to kind of make sure that the geometry in which we're working isn't moving. So I create a time shift, and I'll just say I'm going to hit Control Shift and click on this attribute to remove any expression or animation that it might have. And I'll just stick to the value that it has currently, which is frame 1. So animation, so we don't have any more animation. The next step is going to be for us to isolate the rubber part of this. So we can actually use, since this geometry has materials applied to it, or an attribute with materials, we can actually use that to isolate the rubber part. So let's create a blast. And with this blast, I'm just going to go here to the little arrow, and then I'm going to go to the selection by attributes. Let's choose chop material path, and let's select rubber. Invert, delete none selected, and now we have our rubber. Out of this rubber, let's call this isolate rubber. Let's call this freeze time freeze. Out of this rubber, the primitives that we want, we don't need any of this on the side. We just need the areas that are in contact with the ground. And we don't even need these areas inside. As you can see, there's little details here, which are great, but we don't really need those because those aren't gonna get into contact with the ground. So what we're going to be needing is we need to create something that's going to allow us to quickly, I don't want to go over this manually. Of course, you could select this manually. Let's say you hit S, and we can go to groups. We can select primitives, use the spread angle. Maybe 60 is too much, but maybe 10. And that way we can just manually click on these, and then we'll select everything we need, but we need to go over everything manually, and that's not something that I like to do. So I'm gonna figure out a way of doing the selection in a way that's not manual. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna create a tube. And the cool thing about this type of geometry is that it has an input, and I think a lot of people don't realize this, but you can actually do this. And if you align it with the proper axis, which in our case is the X, we actually have kind of a bounding box or a bounding tube for our tire, which is awesome. Okay, and as you can see already, it's probably you're already guessed where I'm going at. We're already kind of getting the sort of an intersection with the actual primitives that we're interested in. But this tube needs to be polygons. Let's increase the columns to 64. So we have a lot of detail there, maybe even more. Let's go with 128, that's fine. In terms of rows, we don't really need to worry about rows, but we want to have end caps. Okay, so we're in good shape. We're almost getting to what we need. But the other thing that I want to do is let's apply a poly bevel here on the edges. So let's see if we can solve this, get an even better approximation of this tube to our tire. Poly bevel, and let's turn on the ignore flat edges. Let's make this big. We only want the bevel to affect here, and let's play with the distance value. Let's go with this option, and as you can see, it's kind of intersecting there. Which is what we want. Let's give it more divisions, something like 4. Okay. We want it to be kind of overlapping as close as we can get. And we're getting there. Yeah, something like this can work. Let's see. Yeah, something like this can work. We have enough intersection because I really want to grab these as well. Let's see how this works. So after the poly bevel, I really want to make sure. So let me show you where I'm going with this. The idea is going to be to have a group based on this selection. Of course, if we do it like this, we're probably not going to get anything. Let's call this to keep. It's going to be a point group based on bounding regions, and we want the bounding object. Okay, we're getting something, but it's not really what we want. So the first problem we have is that we do have these points, that's fine, but we also have these ones on the side, and that's not great. So we need to kind of make sure we extrude these faces on the sides. So the problem we have with this is that we don't actually have a quick way of selecting this. We would have to manually select those faces, those primitives. So instead of actually activating the end caps here, if we use a polycap, the polycap gives us the option to actually output the group of patch. That way we can poly bevel, and then we can apply a poly extrude. Let's say a distance of 0.1, but only to the patch group. This is a very weird shape, and it might not be the best method, but it really works. Okay, so it gives me the selection that I want. Once I apply a small peak, because right now, as you can see, everything is being included on that volume, but if I kind of shrink the volume a little bit, say minus 0.01, as you can see, I'm isolating everything except what I want. Of course, the value needs to be much, much smaller. So let's try something really small. Okay, this works. Okay, so once we have this, once we have this group, which is actually the elements that we want to delete, so I'll actually change this to delete. We can blast those elements out, and we're left with a part that's going to be more connected to the ground. Okay, of course, these sides are probably too much. We can experiment with different values here. Maybe here on the poly bevel, if I go with just 3 divisions, or maybe more, 8 divisions, it kind of narrows it down a bit. So I think this is a good selection. I'm going to go with this. Okay, so basically what we did was based on the original mesh that we had. We generated a tube, and we're trying to create a mesh that will allow us to envelop the rubber geometry and then push it inside just enough so that we can envelop everything except the elements or the primitives that are closest, or in this case the points that are closest to the surface. Okay, in my case I'm using so we have the poly field to generate the patches. We create the poly bevel, and the poly extrude is just so we don't grab anything from the sides. And with the peak, we push it slightly inward, and then we have that selection, and then we can blast everything out. Okay, so this is going to be the surface where we're going to be that we're going to be using to be as our main source.